Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming. I'm Dan. I'm one of the PDR docs at MSBI in New York City, and I'm excited to be moderating the session. We're calling it Working Smarter, Not Harder, the trainee version. So, this session is being co hosted by the Early Career Subcommittee. So, I want to give a special out to Allah, who co chairs and helped me find a lot of the panelists. We'll first introduce each panelist separately, and then they'll talk about their particular project during training that they did. And then, of course, we're recording this so that we can post it to their group at large. So the first person is Dr. Christina Matulis. She is an emergency medicine physician at Kaiser Permanente in San Diego, California. She went to Tufts for medical school, which is in Boston, and completed her residency at Brown. From there, she went to Yale for her EM simulation fellowship, and her work was focused on the use of simulation for pre-clerkship students and increasing mentorship within the simulation committee. She also served as the fellow on the SAEM executive committee, and in her current role, she runs the resident simulation and interprofessional simulation at Kaiser. The next one that we have is Dr. Anna Kilhane. She is an assistant professor of emergency medicine at MCW. She went to the University of Wisconsin School of Medicine and Public Health and completed her residency at Jackson Memorial Hospital, University of Miami in Florida. From there, she went to Rush for her EM simulation fellowship, and her work there was focused on developing an empathy simulation curriculum for residents. In her current role at MCW, she helps out with resident simulation and is currently developing a simulation fellowship with the goal of having their first fellow in 2025. Our last but not least, our third panelist is Dr. Serenaya McGuire, and she is a practicing physician in both EMS as well as emergency medicine and is active in education, clinical medicine, and research. She completed her medical school at Penn State College of Medicine in Hershey, Pennsylvania, and completed both an EM residency as well as an EMS fellowship at Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. She is a veteran of the United States Air Force, where she served as a military police officer, which has led to interest in tactical medicine, mitigating workplace violence, and improving integrated system collaboration. Currently, she is an assistant professor at Mayo Clinic and is completing her postdoc master's in research while continuously working on improving communication and safety throughout all facets of healthcare through research as well as Q. So I'll have each panelist go through their work that they did in fellowship, and then we'll, of course, open it up to other people for questions. So who wants to go first?
Sure. I can go first. So I'm unique. I didn't do a sim fellowship. I did EMS, but I guess my colleague Ala felt that I was pretty productive in training. So between residency and fellowship, I think I first authored 10 manuscripts, peer-reviewed manuscripts related to workplace violence, EMS, particularly with the COVID-19 pandemic and tactical medicine. I was a chief resident and I was the chair of the disaster and pre-hospital medicine committee during residency and continued to be involved in ASEP leadership positions on the public health and injury prevention committee and fellowship. The other important facet to know is that I had my first child my second year of residency and had a baby as a chief resident. And then I had my second child in fellowship. And that was really important to me to be able to navigate training and be a good mother and a wife. And so the productivity and the projects were in balancing that and making sure that they balanced out and not taking on more roles than necessary. In terms of productivity and optimizing success, what I found is that I was more successful if I became involved in things that were of interest to me. I also found that for those of you that are familiar with the term grit, which we like to talk about at Mayo Clinic, women in medicine and grit, I received a suggestion early in my training to surround yourself with gritty people. And I felt that that really worked out well. And so, in terms of immersing yourself with mentors and with projects, will be successful based on prior experiences with those leaders and those mentors. And there's this really great flow diagram I have that I've looked at where early on in training, you really want to jump on everything, especially things that are somewhat interesting to you. But when you go through and you think about your priorities and family or outside priorities that you have as well, there's this great algorithm that's, should I do this thing? And it goes through and it's, do you absolutely need to do it as part of your job? Well, then if yes, then you go down this route. And if no, then you ask yourself, is this important to me? Or do I think that I have the time for this? And so I found that productivity actually improved by turning down things that I really wasn't super interested in, or I didn't feel that I had the time for in that moment and wanted to prioritize other things that then left me available to take on other projects down the line. And that's my intro.
There's this really good book about grit that I've read before that I really like that kind of really hits on that theme. What's the next?
I'm Anna Culhane, so I did residency down in Florida and then did a 1 year fellowship at Rush in Chicago. I think me and my progress kind of did one big project throughout my fellowship year that was focused on developing an empathy curriculum for residents. And that I think my biggest thing that I found during my fellowship is 1 year goes very, very quickly, especially when it's your first year as an attending too. You think, oh, it's only going to be part-time clinical. A lot of the not every fellowship is different. But for me, I thought going into it, I was very optimistic about how much I could get done on the academic side, since I would be working so much less clinically. And that is the case for a lot of things, but it's also moving to a new city, starting at a new institution. A lot of times you're learning how to be an attending, how to work with residents and medical students. And then in most cases, you're also planning to take at least your written board. So that's a lot of studying on top of that too. So I think going into fellowship with the plan of what you want to accomplish, ideally a project in mind, and then setting realistic goals for yourself as to what you're going to focus on. And I had my one big project that encompassed the whole year. And then I would also try to write smaller cases and just learn simulation as well along the way. But it certainly does go by quickly. I actually got started the end of residency to just get the approval for my project, which was really cool because then when I started fellowship, we could kind of get the ball running with actually running the sims and designing them without having to worry about as much of the red tape research stuff. Even with that, though, we're still working on the manuscript and doing revisions and things like that. So I think just recognizing if you're doing a 1 year post residency program, it is hard to get things done, and you'll probably have to keep continuing them into your next steps as your first few years as an attending and things like that, which is totally okay. But I would really find in your fellowship maybe one or two projects that you're really passionate about, but they can end up taking a lot of time. So they might continue on after that 1 to 2 years, depending on what you're doing.
All right, I can go as well. In terms of my projects, I highlight between residency and fellowship a few projects that I were involved in. And I think they speak to a lot of what the other panels have talked about of just finding something you're really interested and passionate about to fuel your work. I remember I really got involved in simulation or had more of an interest in it probably starting at the end of second year and the beginning of third year of residency. And at my residency program during third year, we had a big step up into working in the critical care rooms and running codes. And as I became more senior, I started to hear a lot of conversation about many of the younger residents feeling very nervous about this, particularly the female residents. And really, this project was born out of a post overnight breakfast or something like that, but decided to use some elective time to sort of further explore my interest in simulation and develop a code curriculum for our residency. And so we incorporated this. I developed a bunch of code cases, sourced some that had already been written, but really went through the act of writing them myself to learn how to do that, and developed a critical care, essentially code day, where we focused on running codes for junior residents. And that continued at least throughout my residency to be an education day that we did every year. And to complete that project, the mentor at Brown that I really loved and respected. It was sort of that mentor that I hoped everyone says, find your mentor, who you want to be in 5 years or something like that. And she was that person. And it's funny, I'm now finally doing the work that she was doing 5 years ago, which is cool. But she really helped me transform my idea into a project. And I found that repeatedly as I developed ideas in residency or fellowship, I tried to find one dedicated mentor to really help guide the evolution of my project. And I felt that made me be really successful in terms of being able to get things from just an idea to completion. Another thing that I did, I went to Tufts for medical school, and they don't have an EM program there. My husband was a surgical resident there at the time, and he had heard that they needed to develop an EM boot camp. And that was something I was really passionate about, undergraduate medical education, pre-residency. And so I partnered with some faculty there and took that opportunity to explore my interest in sim. And then finally, in fellowship, I jumped onto some pre-existing work. They were in the process at Yale of establishing a curriculum for first and second year medical students, but it was sort of in its infancy. And so I was able to, while applying for fellowship, explore places that would match my interests. And also allow me to accomplish something in 1 year. And so finding a project that was sort of in its infancy, but that I could collaborate on and expand it helped me be really successful. And we're still finalizing writing up our project, but we were able to present that at several national conferences. And so I probably don't have too much to add to what the other panelists said, but I think finding a great mentor and then also finding projects that are sort of feasible to do in residency or in fellowship. I agree with what Anna said. In fellowship, you're actually busier than you think. Working to that transition to becoming an attending is tough. So having a project with sort of a clear outline that could either end up in a short publication, perhaps be written up as a blog post or something like that, or could have a well-designed survey to allow you to publish, can motivate you to complete that project as well.
Awesome. So now I want to open it up to the audience. If you guys have questions, you can either unmute and say it out loud, or you can put it in the chat and I'll monitor the chat. The first question that comes to my mind builds off what Christina had mentioned about finding mentors. I feel that especially for such a short fellowship, it's hard to immediately find a mentor that you can jive with well and then go on. How did you guys find your mentors? Was it just by chance that you were assigned that person, or is it your fellowship program director that you guys tend to lean toward, or how do you guys go about that?
My initial mentors that I developed my intern year was by mutual interests, but my initial mentor ended up being someone who ended up not being the continued mentor and the one that I continued with for the majority of my projects. It ended up being a happenstance introduction with my longer serving mentor. And it turned out we had shared interests. And so it also really seemed that word of mouth in the department was really helpful to find out existing projects that individuals were involved in and success rate. I don't know how to otherwise describe. You really want to align yourself with someone that is well tasked at hand and is not scatterbrained as many of us are in EM and starts many projects and doesn't finish them, because you will spend all your time on all of those many projects and that mentor will not finish them and you also will not finish that project. And that can be extremely frustrating. So I think word of mouth is really important. Asking around for individuals' current projects, their interests, how successful they are in project completion, publication, and presentation from other mentees or colleagues in the department can be really helpful.
Yeah, I think in fellowship, again, it's back to your short time frame, especially if you're at a different institution between residency and fellowship. So I think for me, it was definitely my fellowship director and the other simulation people within the department who ended up being really great mentors. And I think so that's if you're interviewing for fellowships or figuring out what your next steps are, it's really important to find a fellowship director that you think you would mix well with, whose goals align well with yours. They have projects in mind that are interesting to you, and it just leads to natural mentorship from there.
I agree. I think in residency, it took me a little bit, probably first and second year, to figure out a mentor. I think I was pre-assigned someone who was a great mentor, but her area of research ended up being not in simulation or what I was ultimately interested in, but working throughout residency, working just in the department and seeing who was doing projects that I was interested in, and then just who had a like-mindedness, right? Who was getting projects done versus who was having a lot of ideas, but maybe not bringing those to completion was helpful to see. And then I think the simulation world, which is awesome, is a very small world where a lot of people know each other. And so being able to utilize that network, and obviously we are on a SAM panel, but I will give a plug to SAM and say this was an organization that I wish that I had known about more and utilized during residency. It wasn't really until fellowship when I worked with Ambrose Wong, who had been the Sim Academy president last year, that I got really involved. But I've found that this has been a really great way to have mentorship on a national level and get involved with projects on a national level, and also just to have career advice on a national level. I'm rambling a little bit here, but utilizing your own residency or fellowship, but then also national organizations for mentorship. And then also realizing that mentorship can take many forms. And so there might be a direct mentor for a specific project, but then you might have a different mentor for sort of career advice, or different mentorship maybe for just your more clinical practice and navigating that. But having those different people and maybe their different roles in your mind is really helpful to have a successful mentee mentorship experience. I totally agree with what Ala said in the chat, that oftentimes the mentor assigned during residency are not necessarily the same mentors that you have projects with. I found that oftentimes the mentors that you're assigned intern year are based off of what you said you were interested in during the interview season, which definitely can change as you get exposure to different areas of medicine.
Yeah, I agree. I remember when I was in training, I'd have the life mentors like my work and then your research mentor. Yeah, as mentors for different things. Because then you can also get lots of opinions from people. See, do you guys, especially for a 1 year fellowship, do you guys have a timeline in your head about where a project should be when you guys are first starting it in order to be able to hit those deadlines, presentations, or conferences?
I think it depends on how big the project is, especially from a sim side. Projects can range from you're doing it multiple days and it's interdisciplinary with a lot of different moving parts to it's a 1 day resident simulation that you're getting all of your data within 1 day. So I think the timelines are going to be slightly different. I think for me, we collected the data for my main project pretty early on. I think it was July or August to just have the data. And then honestly, there was some delays as just life happened with moving and again, getting used to being and attending and taking boards and things like that. But the data was there, which was nice. So I could go back to it and work on it. I think ideally probably having at least some, if your goal is to get an abstract at one of the more simulation based conferences, a lot of those deadlines end up being anywhere between, I want to say December to mid January, depending on which one you're looking at. I think SAM was January something this year, right? So that you'd want to have your data by mid to early fall and then enough time to at least get some of your initial results and try to figure out which direction you're heading so you can get your abstract done by that December, January time. For me, I found I had more time come December, January, just I don't know, maybe it was that the weather gets gross in the Midwest, but to actually work on thinking about any scripts and things like that. So got more of that work done and more of getting into the gritty manuscript and results section come winter, spring of last year was when I finally started doing that. But I had an initial abstract done to submit to some of those conferences.
I try to have different projects in different periods of the timeline. So I'll be working on two manuscript drafts while one project's under data analysis. And then I'm starting to formulate next project ideas for introductory stages. And that way everything's rotating. I'm not bombarded with 5 manuscripts at once. And it's just this process where everything keeps moving through the production line. And then more projects are starting to come. And then by the time that those rotating abstract deadlines are coming up, I have a project that's in data analysis that I'm able to turn over and write up an abstract soon enough. And then usually by the time the conference has come and gone, then I have a really structured abstract that I can put towards a developing manuscript for publishing. And so I find I've been most successful with having different projects in various parts of the timeline so that it's just flows and I'm not stuck on data analysis for 5 different projects at once, which is overwhelming, or stuck in writing up 5 projects at once, which is overwhelming. But having different projects in different parts of the cycle is really doable, I think, for me.
I think in terms, certainly everyone else said, I think a 1 year fellowship goes by very quickly. I would still do my 1 year fellowship because that fit with my life goals. My husband was finishing his residency training. He's in the military as well, which brought us to the West Coast. And so I always balancing academic productivity and goals with personal life is important, but that year certainly went by fast. I tried prior to even starting my fellowship, I got in touch with the fellowship directors to kind of try to set up my project. And like I said, I was able to work on something that was already established, though really with the understanding that I would take ownership of it throughout the year. I think probably in hindsight, adhering to even stricter timelines, like looking for abstract dates for submission or things that, and just having a list of those probably would have been helpful to be even further successful during that year. But I think as you're wrapping up your 3rd or 4th year residency, depending on how long your program is, eyeing your fellowship goals and really outlining what projects you can get done in that year can be really helpful. I similarly been working on a few bigger manuscripts. And then one of the successes I think Ambrose Wong was great at in my fellowship was really trying to find low hanging fruit. What's an education thing that I did in residency that I could actually write up? How could I think creatively to turn things into academic productivity? So for example, when I was in residency, we developed a medical student mentoring program. And that was pretty unique. We split it into 3 different arms, and we did this just because we liked it. And I realized as I got into fellowship, that could actually be written up. And so we were able to actually generate that for an abstract for 3 different conferences and a manuscript, which is something that I, prior to fellowship year, would have never thought that we would be able to do. And so I just encourage you to think about non-traditional routes to be productive as well, especially in the simulation space and education space.
Does anyone else have questions when you guys look at a project? How do you guys judge if it's going to be a big project or a small project? I feel like sometimes I look at a project and I'm like, oh, that should be easy. And then when you actually do it, you're like, oh, this is really hard. And you don't realize all the pieces and parts of it. How do you guys get that out and look and decide?
I think that's also not a great skill that I have. To be honest with you, just early in my career, it's something I'm still figuring out as well. From at least a simulation side, you can look logistically at how many is this incorporate the time period, at least for data collection as a starting point of is this something I need to look at over months? Or is this the 1 day sim to at least see why is how long? That if you're collecting it over 6 months, that's obviously a longer time than if you're doing it over a day. But as far as the research component to the data analysis and getting into that nitty gritty, judging project size is something I'm still learning early on in my career too.
Yeah, when I think of projects start to publication, I think of everything that it entails. So, first of all, am I even interested in the topic? Is it worthwhile to me? And is it when you have a young family, every project you take on is time that you lose from other things that matter. So that also contributes to the value that I impart on projects now too. And I think of, is it going to be valuable to others? Is it going to change practice or be really valuable in terms of medical education content? So I think in terms of from lit review to try to broadly think of the methods, is the IRB going to be intensive if I have to write up an IRB? What are the methods? Is it a prolonged prospective study that's going to take a long time, or is it brief retrospective data extraction that's minimal that I can maybe involve a student or a resident to facilitate? Luckily, at where I work, I have a statistician that I don't need to get funding for. He works at the department, which has really made projects much easier for me because I don't have to budget in statistician support and I can just go to him for anything stats, which I absolutely hate. In terms of future down the road, a reviewer, as I try to get it published, is it going to be highly viewed by a potential reviewer of a journal? Because if I do all this work with the hope of a publication, if it's not really sound in terms of methodology, then it's all going to be for waste because it's not going to be accepted for publication or for conference abstract. So I try to think in terms of longitudinal effort value to decide before I go ahead with accepting that project.
Another question that came through the chat was, how have you seen your mentors keep the project in motion?
Through working with SAEM, I've collaborated on some projects with our research group. And as I'm a new attending, I'm trying to mirror some of these same skills. But I think other panelists said just thinking about the whole scope of the project from the beginning to the end and mapping out a timeline. Steph Stapleton of the research group, when I've worked on just a handful of projects with her, sets out a concrete timeline and really strictly adhere to those goals. I'm obviously being a little flexible with life needs or clinical work as needed. It sounds simple, but actually having it written in a Google Doc, generous but appropriate timelines to do literature review for each step of the project can help keep things on track. And I have a ton of stickies on my computer. So I always keep that as a timeline for projects that are in various stages, just so I make sure that I'm checking all the boxes as I go.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that my mentor continues projects. We complete them together, and then I have branching ideas that lead to more projects. I think the mentor towards the end of fellowship and as a new attending, that mentor that you strongly align with helps you network with others and helps establish cross institutional collaboration. So, not to bring up Ambrose Wong again throughout this whole chat, but so my mentors connected me with Ambrose Wong and other researchers who focus on agitation work and violence. And that's led to a workshop that we're hosting at the next SAEM with several of us from different institutions. And that's the goal of a really good mentor is to help you navigate your projects, help you become a leader in the content that you want to become a leader in, and then help you network with others outside externally. Because as you advance through academic medicine and you try to get into associate professor and professor, you're going to need those external letters from others that are involved in similar work as you. And that's the ultimate goal in academic medicine. So establishing that networking and the collaborations really early, even in fellowship and training, can be really valuable and help you set the stage to becoming a leader in the content that you want to become a leader in.
For your projects, did you guys need to get buy-in or support for your projects, or were those already obtained before you started?
For me, my project didn't really have any financial buy-in or time buy-in or
Either one. So either the grant support sim usually requires some money to run it, either the grant part or just getting especially where the interdisciplinary stuff, right? Getting nursing to be interested in coming, getting the techs to be interested, those type of things.
yeah, mine was part of the residents. Since it was for residents, it was at their bi-monthly sim session. So we had the participants were already required to be there. I didn't have any financial buy-ins that we needed. So that was helpful. And then we were just able to use it within the time dedicated for my fellowship. So there wasn't any specific buy-in necessarily that we needed from any other participants, which made it a little bit easier.
I think similarly, I had In fellowship, the Yale Medical School was very interested in peering and like increasing sort of preclinical experience in simulation. And so we really had a lot of buy-in from the medical school. So I was lucky to see that. But I remember sitting down with Ambrose before I started fellowship and was drafting a list of things that I was interested in and things that I was excited to work on. And we went through that and then also paired it with things that the Sim Center would be interested in working on. And so I think I sort of, in that way, went through buy-in from my mentors and my fellowship also so that we could achieve some common goals, projects that I'd be excited to work on and to devote a lot of time and energy to, but things that would also match the needs of the medical school and the simulation center.
So we talked some about finding a mentor and picking someone. How do you ask someone to be your mentor? What do you say to them?
I think it just depends on the situation and the person. I mean, as an early trainee, when I identified my training mentor, I said, will you be my mentor? You are badass. I want you as a mentor. And then with my research mentors, it just flowed together. Hey, what is going on here is mentorship that we really haven't called out, but it is what it is. And it's probably the most valuable mentorship I've had so far. So we haven't really identified it other than for future awards or grant applications saying, will you support this as my mentor? And some acknowledgement in return, yes. But before that, not really asking if you're my mentor, but just recognizing that it just happened naturally.
I agree. For me, it's always just been a natural thing that happens. I don't think I've ever really formally asked someone besides writing things up and things like that, specifically for mentorship.
Yeah, it does feel awkward dating and not always naming the relationship. I agree. I think many of my mentorship experiences or relationships have flowed naturally, but I do think there's some instances where it is helpful. I will email someone, ask specifically for advice or ask specifically for guidance on a project. And now, obviously, I'm early in my career, but having had medical students or residents come to me to ask for advice or mentorship, it is helpful sometimes in certain relationships to clarify exactly what you're hoping to achieve from that relationship too. Are you looking for career advice? Are you looking for just a one-time pass through on a project, or are you looking for guidance throughout the whole project, a year? I think that can be helpful because then I think I can clarify your role a little bit more. So I certainly have had either mentors or people that I worked with in residency that I was probably hoping for more mentorship from than I actually got. Now realizing it was the middle of a pandemic, they had many other things on their plate too. But in hindsight, I think during residency, I could have maybe been a little bit more explicit about what I needed or what I was hoping for to ultimately get some clearer mentorship.
To follow up on that, how do you know that you're ready to be a mentor? Or do you guys not feel you're ready? I guess this can also be a question.
I think it depends on the topic. If certainly I feel comfortable serving as or maybe for a more junior resident who's looking for guidance on a career path or potentially an earlier project that might have some overlap with my interests. I think also that's something I'm learning to do of how to identify what I can serve as a mentor at, but also what I don't have expertise yet. And then I think utilizing those broader networks that we have, I might not have expertise at some level right now, but I could connect them with someone I know from fellowship or the SAM community or something like that. So I think you can connect people to additional mentors without necessarily having that expertise yourself.
Yeah. I was asking, how do you maintain the mentorship relationship long term as you transition from one place to another?
I think a lot of it will come from if you're still continuing to work on projects together and things that Zoom and meetings have made long distance mentorship and just long distance teamwork and working together, things that a little bit easier, I think. But it certainly, if you don't have an active project going on, does require maybe a little bit of effort. I think maybe for me, it's a lot of emails or things that just back and forth. And then if you happen to be at the same place or the same conference or something, trying to find a time to meet up.
Yeah, I haven't personally transitioned between institutions, but I know that conferences are really big for me to meet up with others that I've previously worked with at my institution or I've connected with and continue to mentor or receive mentorship from other institutions. So that's been a really great aspect of regional and national conferences for sure.
I agree. I'm going to IMSH next week, and a mentor of mine from medical school that I worked for this sim boot camp, I probably haven't talked to in a few months. And he texted me that he's going to be here for the conference and we're going to meet up. And so I think using conferences and also realizing stuff ebbs and flows. We're all really busy in emergency medicine. And so you might not talk to someone for a few months, but You can shoot them a text, you can send them an email or reach out to them after some time. And I think I do really feel it's a small community, having spent my full life in New England and then moving to the West Coast. Everyone still seems to know everyone in emergency medicine, which is comforting for maintaining those relationships.
Does the group have any other questions?
One other thought I meant to say earlier too, but I think, and I'm definitely not the best at this, but I think I'm growing to be better about this is also it's okay to say no to projects. Someone might ask you to be involved in a research project. And if it isn't something that you're motivated to do or doesn't sound that exciting to you, there will be other projects and just there will be other opportunities. And I think I learned that the hard way, probably first and second year, where I wanted to spread myself really thin and get involved in a bunch of things. And once I narrowed my focus, I found that I had more energy to put towards projects and could actually get them to completion rather than never really wanting to wake up and work on that project after an overnight shift or something.
All right. Well, I want to thank the three panelists for all their time. Your thoughts are really great, and I think everyone will get along. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.